Welcome to Hollywood Graveyard. Today we continue our tour filmed by you, the Hollywood Graveyard community, visiting famous and historical graves in your neck of the woods. Together we'll cross the country and the oceans to pay our respects to legends around the globe, like Alec Guinness, Bram Stoker, Amy Winehouse, and many more. My friends, the time is yours. Part 4 of our viewers special brings us to Ireland and the United Kingdom. Today we'll be visiting many of England's legendary cemeteries like Highgate and Golders Green, but most of the sites we'll be visiting today are in churchyards. Long before the age of the commercial and public cemetery, it was tradition in the old world for burials to take place either on private land or, more commonly, in church graveyards. We've got a lot of ground to cover, so we'd better get rolling. If you haven't done so already, be sure to check out the first 3 parts of our Viewers Special. Our day begins in Dublin, Ireland, at Dean's Grange Cemetery. This is the final resting place of Arthur Shields, an actor born right here in Dublin. His acting career began at the Abbey Theatre as a youth, and in the 1930s he was brought to the States to perform in films for John Ford, including the Oscar-winning film The Quiet Man in 1952. Other memorable performances include How Green Was My Valley. He died in California at the age of 74. His ashes returned home and buried here. At Glasnevin Cemetery, we find the most visited grave in Ireland, that of Irish revolutionary Michael Collins. He was one of the leading figures in the Irish struggle for independence. During the War of Independence, he was a general for the Irish Volunteers and Director of Intelligence for the Irish Republican Army. After the ceasefire, he was among those sent to London to negotiate peace terms, establishing the Irish Free State. Collins was shot and killed in an ambush by anti-treaty forces in 1922, at the age of 31. In Comber, Northern Ireland, is the Comber Presbyterian Graveyard. On the grounds is the Andrews family plot and a monument to Thomas Andrews. He's noted for being the designer and builder of the Titanic. He was managing director and head of drafting for the shipbuilding company Harland and Wolff in Belfast, Ireland. Construction on the ship began in 1909 and tragically sunk on her maiden voyage in 1912, the most famous shipwreck in history. Andrews was lost at sea. He's been portrayed in several dramatizations of the Titanic sinking, including by Victor Garber in the 1997 film Titanic. As the Titanic sank, the ship's band played music, hymns like Nearer My God to Thee, to calm the passengers. We've crossed the Irish Sea and now find ourselves in England. At Colne Cemetery, we find the final resting place of the leader of the ship's band, Wallace Hartley. He played the violin, leading the 8-member band on Titanic's maiden voyage. Survivors recall the band playing until the very end, an act heralded as one of the noblest in the annals of heroism at sea. His body was recovered and laid to rest here, his tombstone bearing the inscription, Nearer My God to Thee. As the Titanic crossed the frigid waters of the Atlantic, 2 men sat high in the crow's nest as lookouts. We head south to Hollybrook in Southampton to find one of them. Frederick Fleet was a British sailor who was on duty as lookout the night the Titanic struck an iceberg. The calm, moonless night made for difficult seeing. That, combined with the fact that they were not issued binoculars, by the time they spotted the iceberg, it was too late. Fleet sounded the warning, iceberg right ahead. Fleet was ordered onto a lifeboat to man the boat, the same lifeboat as Molly Brown. He survived the disaster and testified that had they been issued binoculars, they might have spotted the iceberg sooner. Also here at Hollybrook is one of Britain's legendary funny men. Just across the street from the chapel is the grave of Benny Hill. He's best remembered for his television program, The Benny Hill Show, which aired in various forms from 1955 to 1991 in over 140 countries. It was a sketch comedy show that combined high-energy slapstick with burlesque and naughty double entendre humor. It's also remembered for its frequent use of the novelty saxophone tune Yakety Sax during chase sequences and the closing titles. The Benny Hill Show became one of the most watched TV shows in the UK. Hill died of a heart attack at the age of 68, sitting in his favorite chair and watching television. East of here, in Petersfield, we find Petersfield Cemetery. This is the final resting place of one of England's truly great actors, Sir Alec Guinness. He was nominated for 5 Oscars, winning for his powerful performance in the World War II film The Bridge Over the River Kwai. He also had roles in films like Oliver Twist, Lawrence of Arabia, and Dr. Zhivago. But audiences today remember him best as Jedi Master and mentor to Luke Skywalker, Obi-Wan Kenobi, a role which earned him one of his Oscar nominations.
You can't win, Darth. If you strike me down, I shall become more powerful than you can possibly imagine.
He was knighted by Elizabeth II for his services to the arts, and lived to be 86. This is the Church of St. Margaret of Antioch in East Wellow. Founded in 1215, it has been a place of worship and pilgrimage for over 800 years. On the grounds of this church, we find the final resting place of Florence Nightingale. She was a social reformer and founder of modern nursing. In her day, she was a leading advocate for improved medical care in hospitals, infirmaries, and battlefields. Her efforts led to the modern nursing profession, setting the standard for patient care and commitment and record keeping. In 1860, she founded the first nursing school in London, the first of its kind in the world. After her death at age 90, the offer for burial at Westminster Abbey was declined by her family, and she was laid to rest here. In Minstead, the lawnmowers are on vacation, and the donkeys are filling in. We now find ourselves at the All Saints Church here in Minstead. In this churchyard is one of Britain's great writers, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. He was an early pioneer of crime and detective fiction, best remembered for his stories featuring an eccentric consulting detective named Sherlock Holmes. First appearing in 1887's A Study in Scarlet, Sherlock Holmes is best known for his proficiency with observation, forensics, deduction, and logical reasoning. In the decades that followed, Holmes would be featured in 4 novels and 56 short stories. And of course, countless film, radio, stage, TV, and game productions. Arthur Conan Doyle died of a heart attack at the age of 71. Another of England's legendary writers rests here at Guildford Cemetery. This is the grave of Charles Lutwidge Dodgson, better known by his pen name, Lewis Carroll. He was the writer that took us to Wonderland alongside a little girl named Alice. In 1865, Lewis Carroll published the children's novel, Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, which tells the story of a young girl who fell through the rabbit hole into a fantasy world. Its sequel, Through the Looking Glass, was published in 1871. The character of Alice was inspired by Alice Liddell, the young daughter of an acquaintance of Carroll, Henry Liddell. Carroll told the story to Alice, and she urged him to write it down. Alice in Wonderland would become one of the major early influences on fantasy fiction, and of course has been recreated countless times in every major media form. North in Merseyside, near Liverpool, is St. Peter's Church. It was at a festival at this church that a young John Lennon met an even younger Paul McCartney in 1957. The Beatles' song Eleanor Rigby tells of a woman who died in the church and was buried along with her name. Here in this same churchyard is a stone bearing the name Eleanor Rigby. McCartney insists the name was made up, but perhaps there was a deeper inspiration. Also here in Merseyside is St. Michael Churchyard. This is where we find a man known as the Fifth Beatle, Stuart Sutcliffe. In 1960, Sutcliffe joined the band as the original bass player, and it was he and Lennon who came up with the name, the Beatles. In 1961, he left the group to pursue painting, and Paul McCartney took over the role as bass player. He displayed tremendous talent as a painter, but his life and career were cut short when he died of a cerebral hemorrhage while studying in Germany. He was 21. Not far from here in Cheshire is Warrington Cemetery. Here lies George Formby, at one time the UK's highest paid entertainer. He He was an actor, singer, and songwriter who became beloved to a worldwide audience, performing light comical songs on the ukulele and banjo-lele. In the 1930s and 40s, he began performing in films and became a major star. He died of a heart attack at the age of 56. Hopping over to the East Coast, in Scarborough, is St. Mary's Church. Here we find one of the Bronte sisters, Anne Bronte. She was a novelist and poet who wrote Agnes Grey and The Tenant of Wildfell Hall, considered one of the first feminist novels. She died of tuberculosis in 1849 at just 29. Her sister Charlotte wrote Jane Eyre, and another sister, Emily, wrote Wuthering Heights. In Derbyshire is St. Michael and All Angels Churchyard. This is, reputedly, where Little John is buried. He was said to have been Robin Hood's chief lieutenant and second in command of the Merry Men. Folktales tell of a giant of a man, ironically nicknamed, who joined Robin's band of outlaws, as told in the earliest Robin Hood ballads and stories. When he lived and died, or even if he lived and died, remains unknown, but local lore places his final resting place here, under an old yew tree not far from where his cottage once stood. South to Essex and St. Peter and St. Paul's Church in Blacknotley. This is the final resting place of John Ray, known as the father of natural history. He was a highly influential naturalist, botanist, and philosopher who made major contributions to taxonomy, the classification of living organisms. He was the first to produce biological definitions of species. He died at the age of 77 in 1705. In Shrewsbury, we find St. Chad's Church. On these grounds, we find a grave to the first fictional character we've ever visited, Ebenezer Scrooge. There have been many iterations of Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol, but my personal favorite, the one I watch every year, is the 1984 version starring George C. Scott as Scrooge. When filmmakers were shooting the scene in the graveyard where Scrooge discovers his own grave, they found an actual tombstone that had worn beyond legibility, and asked to use it and inscribe Ebenezer Scrooge.
Dear me, I am not the man I was. I will not be the man I must have been but for this visitation. Why show me this if I am past all hope?
After filming, the grave was left as is, and remains to this day. It's a sunny day in Sunningdale Cemetery in Berkshire. Here is the final resting place of actress Diana Dors, one of her generation's blonde bombshells, Britain's answer to Marilyn Monroe. Early on, she had a small role as Charlotte in 1948's Oliver Twist. By the 50s, she had established herself as Britain's leading sex symbol in films like Lady Godiva Rides Again and The Long Haul. In the 60s and 70s, she found success on television as well, including the lead role in the sitcom Queenie's Castle. After making the movie Steaming in 1984, Diana was diagnosed with cancer and died at just 52. Diana's third husband was Alan Lake, also an actor, a popular figure in British television in the 60s and 70s. After her death, Lake fell into a deep depression and took his own life at the age of 43. In Oxfordshire is the Church of All Saints, which dates way back to the 12th century. In the church's burial grounds, we find the grave of George Orwell, whose real name was Eric Arthur Blair. He was an English novelist whose work highlighted social injustice and opposition to totalitarianism. Many of us read his books in school, like the 1945 novella Animal Farm and his dystopian novel 1984. The term Orwellian has been used to describe authoritarian practices, and other terms that have entered our vernacular, like Big Brother and Thought Police, come from the writings of George Orwell, writings that are as prescient today as they were over a half-century ago. To another churchyard in Oxfordshire, this time St. Mary the Virgin Church in Henley-on-Thames. Here we find the final resting place of one of the UK's most successful female singers, Dusty Springfield, an icon of the swinging 60s. Her soulful, smoky mezzo-soprano could be heard in hits like I Only Want to Be With You and Son of a Preacher Man.
The only boy who could ever teach me was the son of a preacher man, you see he was.
Dusty was inducted into both the Rock and Roll and the UK Music Halls of Fame. She was just 59 when she died from breast cancer. There's more than one church here in Oxfordshire dedicated to St. Mary the Virgin. This one is in Thame. Just off the path surrounding the church is the grave of one of the Bee Gees, Robin Gibb. He was a singer and songwriter who formed the popular trio in the 50s with brothers Maurice and Barry Gibb. By the late 60s, early 70s, the group emerged as a popular music act, and by the mid to late 70s were a dominant force in the disco music era. They're perhaps best remembered today for the creation of one of the best-selling movie soundtracks of all time, 1977's Saturday Night Fever, which includes the Bee Gees' signature hit, Stayin' Alive.
Staying alive, staying alive, staying alive.
Another hit single from the album was How Deep Is Your Love, which is alluded to right here on Robin's headstone. In 2012, Robin Gibb died from cancer at the age of 62. Also here is a memorial to younger brother, Andy Gibb. He was not part of the Bee Gees and chose to forge his own musical path, becoming a popular solo performer in the 80s. He had 3 consecutive #1 hits, including I Just Wanna Be Your Everything. He died at the age of 30 from inflammation of the heart due to drug use. He was entombed at Forest Lawn in Hollywood Hills, which we visited in our very first video. This memorial was placed for fans here in the UK to be able to visit. In Cholsey, Oxfordshire, is yet another church dedicated to St. Mary, whose founding is believed to date back to approximately 986, with reconstruction taking place between 1150 and 1170. A regular amongst those who worshipped here was famous crime writer Agatha Christie. In the northwest corner of the churchyard, we find her grave. Her books have sold over 1 billion copies in the English language, only outsold by Shakespeare and the Bible. She's known for her 66 detective novels and 14 short story collections, particularly those featuring fictional detectives Hercule Poirot and Miss Marple, both of which have been made into popular TV series and movies, including Murder on the Orient Express. She was made a Dame Commander of the British Empire in 1971 and died in 1976 at the age of 85. To Denham in Buckinghamshire and, you guessed it, St. Mary the Virgin Churchyard. Here we find the grave of Sir John Mills, a beloved British character actor who appeared in over 100 films, including his Oscar-winning performance in the 1970 film Ryan's Daughter. Other notable roles include Great Expectations and the lead in Disney's Swiss Family Robinson. He was the father of actress Hayley Mills, who starred in Pollyanna and The Parent Trap. Mills lived to be 97. St. Peter and St. Paul Church in Great Missenden was built around the 14th and 15th centuries. In these hallowed grounds rests another great UK writer, Roald Dahl. He rose to prominence in the 40s, writing for both children and adults, becoming one of the world's best-selling writers. His famous works include James and the Giant Peach, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, Matilda, Fantastic Mr. Fox, and more, all of which have been adapted for film, television, and other media. He died from cancer at the age of 74. If you're from the state of Pennsylvania, you'll appreciate our next stop. Old Jordan's Cemetery is a Quaker cemetery here in Buckinghamshire. This Friends Meeting House was built in 1688. In the burial grounds outside the meeting house we find the grave of William Penn, an English nobleman and American colonial. In 1681, Charles II granted a land charter to William Penn to repay a debt he owed to Penn's father, Admiral William Penn, who was the namesake of Pennsylvania. The following year, Penn made his way to the New World, founded a colony in Pennsylvania, and established the city of Philadelphia. There he became a strong advocate for one of the cornerstones of American democracy, religious freedom. Taking a slight detour out of the cemeteries, next door is this unique and beautiful old barn. Much of this barn was constructed from the lumber of an old ship, and according to tradition, that ship is reputed to be the Mayflower, which carried the Pilgrims from Plymouth to New England in the 1620s. This is known as the Mayflower Barn. Back to the cemeteries, we arrive in Gloucestershire and Cheltenham Cemetery. Here we find Brian Jones. He was a rock musician, a guitar player and founding member of the highly influential rock group the Rolling Stones, which formed in 1962. Brian Jones would help craft the style that would become the sound of the Rolling Stones. But in the years that followed, Jones became disillusioned with the direction of the band and saw his influence diminish. He left the group in 1969 and, within a month, was dead, found at the bottom of a swimming pool, drowned at the age of 27. He was reportedly buried 10 to 12 feet deep here to prevent exhumation by trophy hunters. For the last stretch of our tour in the UK will be in England's capital city, London. In the early decades of the 19th century, London was facing a crisis. Inadequate burial space along with a high mortality rate. There wasn't enough room for the dead. To address this issue, in the 1830s, Parliament passed a statute to open 7 new private cemeteries in the countryside around London. One of them became the capital city's principal cemetery, Highgate Cemetery, which opened in 1839. In 1859, the cemetery expanded and is now divided into an east and west side. The east side is open to the public, but the west side is only accessible through a guided tour. The west side is where stars like George Michael and Gene Simmons are laid to rest. However, famous graves are inaccessible on the west side. We can, however, enjoy much of the beautiful scenery here. And as part of the tour of the west side, visitors are also brought into the catacombs for an up-close encounter with the dead. Over to the east side, there are a number of famous graves to see. Perhaps the most visited is that of Karl Marx, philosopher, economist, and socialist revolutionary. His theories on society, economics, and politics have collectively become known as Marxism, which believes that the workers of the world must unite to free themselves from oppression. His writings have inspired revolutions the world over, each an expression of their own interpretation of the writings of Marx. Marx is therefore considered one of the most influential figures in human history. But his legacy is complex, both controversial and relevant today. Northwest of here, in Square 74, we find the grave of Douglas Adams. He was an author and humorist, best remembered for The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, published in 1979 and spawning 4 sequels. The series became immensely popular, eventually being adapted into other forms like a TV series and a feature film in 2005. And the number 42? Well, as you know, that's the answer to the great question of life, the universe, and everything. Adams was just 49 when he died of a heart attack. So long, Douglas, and thanks for all the fish. Corin Redgrave was an actor, born into the Redgrave dynasty of actors, including father Michael Redgrave and sisters Vanessa and Lynn Redgrave. He was a familiar figure on stage in both New York and London, noted for his performances of Shakespeare, as well as Tennessee Williams' Not About Nightingales. He died at the age of 70. This is the grave of George Eliot. No, the picture isn't incorrect. George Eliot was the pen name of Mary Ann Evans, an English novelist of the Victorian era. She wrote under a male pen name to escape stereotypes associated with female writers. Among some of her best-known novels is Middlemarch, considered one of the great English novels. It's hard to miss the grave of entertainer and manager Malcolm McLaren. The stone features his death mask. McLaren rose to prominence as the manager of the 70s punk rock band the Sex Pistols. He supported the fashion of the early punk era through his Chelsea boutique called Sex. He would go on to perform as well, experimenting in genres ranging from hip-hop to funk and even disco. After his death at the age of 64, he was buried here, to the strains of Sid Vicious's My Way. Another artist who left his distinctive mark on Highgate Cemetery is Patrick Caulfield. He was a painter and printmaker, part of the pop art movement. No poignant phrases about being at rest or embraced in the arms of angels here. Just dead. Simple, succinct, real, like his art. And his last great work of art was his own tombstone. Our last stop here at Highgate is considered one of the greatest actors of theatre of the 20th century, Ralph Richardson, who was a star in London's West End and on Broadway in the 30s. He became the first actor of his generation to be knighted in 1947. He also had an illustrious film career, seen in movies like Dr. Zhivago. He was nominated for 2 Oscars for his film work, for The Heiress in 1949, and his final film, Greystoke, The Legend of Tarzan, Lord of the Apes. He died of a stroke at the age of 80. We head south now into the city to find St. Paul's Church in Covent Garden, consecrated in 1683. It's affectionately known as the Actors' Church for its long association with the local theatre community. Theatre Royal Drury Lane and the Royal Opera House are both within its parish, and since 2007, St. Paul's has hosted its own in-house theatre company. The walls of the church are lined with memorial plaques to actors, musicians, and other notables. Most of these plaques are simply memorials to those whose remains lie elsewhere, but a small handful are actually located here on the grounds, and others had their memorial services here. Dame Edith Evans was one of the greats of the British stage. In a career that spanned some 6 decades, she played roles in plays from Shakespeare to Shaw. She also had a number of film roles, receiving 3 Oscar nominations for films including Tom Jones. After her death at age 88, her ashes were interred here. Next to Edith, we find the urn which contains the ashes of actress Ellen Terry. She was Britain's leading Shakespearean actress of the late 1800s, receiving acclaim for her performances in roles like Lady Macbeth and Juliet. Later in her career, she focused on the plays of George Bernard Shaw, and even had a few silent film roles. After her death at age 88, she was cremated at Golders Green, her ashes kept here at the Actors' Church. One of the individuals memorialized here who actually is buried out in the churchyard is Thomas Arne. He was a composer who wrote one of Britain's great patriotic anthems, Rule Britannia, composed in 1740. Michael Redgrave was an actor, part of the Redgrave dynasty, whose children include Corin, Lynn, and Vanessa Redgrave. He's considered another of Britain's great stage performers of the 20th century. On film, he received an Academy Award nomination for his performance in Morning Becomes Electra. After his death at age 77, his ashes were scattered in the garden outside the church. Alan J. Lerner was a playwright and lyricist, known for his frequent collaboration with composer Frederick Loewe. Together they were Lerner and Loewe, creating some of the most popular and enduring works of musical theatre, including Camelot and My Fair Lady. Lerner also wrote screenplays for films like An American in Paris and Gigi. His work earned him 3 Tonys and 3 Oscars, among many other accolades in film, music, and theatre. After his death, his ashes were scattered. Anna Neagle was a major box office draw in Britain for decades, and was voted the most popular star in 1949. Her lightweight musicals brought a much-needed reprieve to war-torn English audiences. She's also known for playing British historical figures like Nell Gwyn and Queen Victoria. After her death at age 81, she was interred in the City of London Cemetery. Margaret Rutherford was an actress perhaps best remembered today for her role as the Agatha Christie character, Miss Marple, in several films. She also won an Oscar for her role in the film The VIPs. She's buried in the St. James Churchyard in Buckinghamshire. Horror fans will recognize this next name, Boris Karloff, one of the great icons of Hollywood's monster movies. Karloff is best remembered today for his role as Frankenstein's monster, which he played in the Universal films of the 30s, Frankenstein, Bride of Frankenstein, and Son of Frankenstein. When we envision Frankenstein's monster today, it's Karloff's character that we see. He also played Imhotep in The Mummy, and voiced the Grinch in How the Grinch Stole Christmas. Karloff lived to be 81, and his ashes are buried under a rosebush at Guildford Crematorium in Surrey. Actress and singer Gracie Fields became the most popular British film star of the 30s after her first film, Sally in Our Alley. Her strong working-class character became a symbol of hope and courage during the Depression years. Other popular films include Holy Matrimony. She spent her final years in Italy, which is where she is laid to rest. Hattie Jacques was a well-regarded comedic actress in Britain, known mainly for her roles in the Carry On films of the 50s and 60s. After her death at age 56, she had a memorial service here and was cremated at Putney Vale. Also here at St. Paul's is a memorial to one of the film world's most iconic figures, Charlie Chaplin. When we think of silent comedies, the first thing many of us picture is Charlie Chaplin's Little Tramp character, with pants and shoes that are too big, a jacket that's too small, bowler cap, toothbrush mustache, and a bamboo cane. His tramp character debuted in the 1914 film Mabel's Strange Predicament with Mabel Normand. We would see the lovable tramp again in films considered among the all-time greats, like Modern Times and The Kid. Despite being known for his Little Tramp comedies during the silent era, many consider Chaplin's greatest film to be his first talkie, the 1940 film The Great Dictator, in which he satirized Adolf Hitler and condemned fascism, which was on the rise at the time.
To those who can hear me, I say, do not despair. The misery that is now upon us is but the passing of greed, the bitterness of men who fear the way of human progress. The hate of men will pass, and dictators die, and the power they took from the people will return to the people, and so long as men die, liberty will never perish.
He received an honorary Academy Award for the incalculable effect he had on the motion picture industry. After his death at age 88, Charlie was laid to rest in Switzerland. Above Charlie is a memorial to Noel Coward, author, composer, and actor. He published more than 50 plays in his career, like Private Lives and the musical play Bittersweet. He also wrote hundreds of songs like Mad About the Boy. In 1944, Coward was nominated for an Oscar for his screenplay for the film In Which We Serve. After his death, he was buried in Jamaica. Peter O'Toole was a man of prodigious talents, a giant of the stage and screen whose work earned him no less than 8 Oscar nominations. He rose to prominence as a Shakespearean actor and went on to gain international fame for his role in Lawrence of Arabia in 1962, considered one of the all-time great performances given by an actor.
What, in your opinion, do these people hope to gain from this war?
They hope to gain their freedom.
There's one born every minute.
They're going to get it, Mr. Bentley. I'm going to give it to them.
Other of his notable roles include The Lion in Winter and Goodbye, Mr. Chips. In 2003, he received an honorary Academy Award. After his death at age 81, he was cremated at Golders Green. His ashes are privately held. Richard Beckinsale was a comedic actor, fondly remembered for his roles in the TV sitcoms Porridge and Rising Damp. He died in his sleep of a massive heart attack at just 31 due to a congenital heart defect. His young daughter Kate was just 5 at the time. She would follow in her father's footsteps, becoming an actress, known for the Underworld series. The last memorial plaque we'll find here is to legendary actress VIvien Leigh. Her work in the film Fire Over London with future husband Laurence Olivier brought her to the attention of David O. Selznick, who was searching for the actress to play the lead in Gone with the Wind. It was the most coveted role in Hollywood at the time, and VIvien landed it. Her role as Scarlett O'Hara remains her best known, and won her an Oscar.
I'll go home. But I'll think of some way to get him back. After all, tomorrow is another day.
She also won an Oscar for her role as Blanche Dubois in A Streetcar Named Desire. Despite her film success, VIvien was primarily a stage performer, seen in works by Noel Coward to Shakespeare. She died at the age of 53, her life and career cut short by tuberculosis. After her death, she was cremated, her ashes scattered at her summer home. Vivien Leigh, like many others we've profiled here, was cremated at Golders Green Crematorium, not only London's premier crematorium, but one of the largest and best-known crematoria in the world. It was founded in 1902, and since then over 300,000 cremations have taken place here. The walls are lined with commemorative tablets with the names of those cremated here. Some have their ashes scattered here in the gardens, others planted under a rose bush, and some take the ashes elsewhere. Others still have their ashes inurned in the Golders Green Columbarium. In addition to those already mentioned, just a few of the stars who were cremated here but their ashes taken elsewhere for scattering, private holding, or interment include B.B. Daniels, T.S. Eliot, Rudyard Kipling, and H.G. Wells. We'll begin our tour of Golders Green in the star-studded West Memorial Court. Along these walls are tablets to many of those cremated here, including quite a number of the UK's legendary musicians. Let's meet a few of them. Marc Bolan was a rock musician, remembered as the lead singer of the glam rock band T-Rex. Bolan was a pioneer of the glam rock movement of the 70s. Among the band's hits is Get It On. Get it on, and get it on. He was just 29 when he died in a car crash. This marker was placed on the 25th anniversary of his death. The original marker is here, just next to it. His ashes are interred out in the Rose Garden. Just next to Marc is another rock legend, Keith Moon. Beginning in 1964, he was the drummer for the influential rock group The Who, whose hits include My Generation and Won't Get Fooled Again.
We don't get fooled again.
In 1978, Keith died of a drug overdose. He was 32. He was posthumously inducted into the Modern Drummers Hall of Fame and is still regarded as one of rock's all-time great drummers. His ashes were scattered out in the garden. David Guest was a producer and television personality. He produced Michael Jackson's 30th anniversary celebration in 2001. Guest is also known for his marriage to Liza Minnelli. After his death, he was cremated here, his ashes scattered in New York. Larry Adler was a harmonica player, considered one of the men responsible for popularizing the harmonica in serious music circles. He's remembered for performing great orchestral works on his harmonica, like Rhapsody in Blue and Bolero. He made appearances in a handful of films as a harmonica player and even composed music for film. His score for Genevieve earned him an Oscar nomination. Huey Green was a television personality, known as a presenter on a number of popular game and talent shows, like Double Your Money and Opportunity Knocks, which is alluded to right here on his marker. He died of cancer at the age of 77. Let's move on now to other parts of Golders Green. Here is a plaque commemorating Robert Harbin. He was a magician, the first British illusionist to make the move from stage to TV. He developed a number of his own illusions, like Neon Light Illusion and the Zigzag Girl. He also became an authority on origami, helping introduce the art form to the Western world with a series of origami programs for TV. He wrote a number of books on both magic and origami. Ivor Novello was one of the most famous matinee idols, writers, and composers of the British stage in the early 20th century. His first big hit song was Keep the Home Fires Burning, popular during the First World War. He would go on to write musicals and even perform in many of them, like West End productions of Glamorous Night and The Dancing Years. He could also be seen in film, including Alfred Hitchcock's 1927 silent film, The Lodger, A Story of the London Fog. This lilac bush was planted as a memorial to Novello, where his ashes were interred after his death at age 58 from a coronary thrombosis. Lilacs were chosen as a reference to one of his popular songs, We'll Gather Lilacs.
We'll gather lilacs in the spring again.
This is the cloister garden near the eastern end of the crematorium. Here we find the final resting place of Peter Sellers, one of the entertainment world's legendary comedians. He's perhaps best remembered for his role as inept French police inspector Jacques Clouseau in 5 Pink Panther films beginning in the 60s.
A beekeeper who has lost his voice, a cook who thinks he's a gardener, and a witness to a murder. Oh yes, it is obvious to my trained eye that there is much more going on here than meets the ear.
He was the first actor to receive an Academy Award nomination for a film playing multiple roles, 3 to be precise, in Stanley Kubrick's Dr. Strangelove. He also received acclaim and an Academy Award nomination for his performance in Being There. In 1980, he suffered a fatal heart attack at just 54. A private funeral was held here, after which his ashes were interred at this rosebush. Let's head now into the beautiful Golders Green Columbarium, which opened in 1911, a sight I've been dying to see for years. Here is the niche and urn of the world's most famous ballet dancer, Anna Pavlova. She was a principal artist of the Imperial Russian Ballet and the Ballet Russe. She's most recognized for the creation of The Dying Swan, a solo choreographed specifically for her, set to the music of Saint-Saëns. She would become the first ballet dancer to achieve international stardom through her ballet tours around the world. While touring The Hague, she was told she had pneumonia and required an operation. She was also informed that the surgery would mean she would never dance again. She refused, saying, "If I can't dance, I'd rather be dead." She died a short time later, at the age of 49. Her last words were reportedly, "Get my swan costume ready." In accordance with ballet tradition, at what would have been her next scheduled performance, the show went on, with a single spotlight circling an empty stage where she would have been. This niche once also featured a pair of Anna's ballet shoes, but they were stolen years ago. Below her is the niche of her husband, Victor Dandre, who was also her manager. These ballet shoes were gifted by an admirer. Here we also find Ella Shields. She was an actress and music hall singer known for her male impersonation routine as Burlington Bertie. The role made her a sensation in both the UK and the States. Even the Golders Green Guide knows her signature song, Burlington Bertie from Bow.
Bert, I haven't a shirt, but everyone knows we've had him. So there's a story and a tale everywhere.
There is indeed, which is why we do what we do here at Hollywood Graveyard. And I'm very excited about this next story. Fans of Dracula and vampires, lovers of the macabre and gothic horror, know the name of Bram Stoker. He was an Irish author best known today for his 1897 novel, Dracula. It was his novel about a Transylvanian count that would popularize our modern concept of the vampire. His writings were only moderately successful in his lifetime, and he died without knowing how influential they would become. Dracula has since become one of the most filmed characters from literature, along with Sherlock Holmes and the Bible. Perhaps the best known film adaptation remains the 1931 Universal film starring Bela Lugosi as Dracula.
I am Dracula.
In addition to writing, Stoker worked for Sir Henry Irving as manager of the Lyceum Theatre in London. He died at 64 after suffering a number of strokes. This is the urn of Karl Mannheim. He was an influential early 20th century sociologist, sociology being the study of society, culture, and social interactions. One area he focused on was the sociology of knowledge, which studies the relationship between human ideas and beliefs and the social context in which they arise. His best-known work is Ideology and Utopia, published in 1929. At the rise of the Nazi Party, he fled Germany and settled in Great Britain, where he became a lecturer in London. Our last stop here at Golders Green is the world's most famous shrink, Sigmund Freud. He is considered the father of psychoanalysis, which is a clinical method for treating mental disorders through dialogue between patient and doctor. He became known for his free association sessions, where he would have patients lie comfortably on a couch and encourage them to tell him what was on their minds, to talk through their difficulties. Freud also delved into dream analysis and the study of the subconscious. His influence on the world of psychology and psychiatry are still seen today. A longtime cigar smoker, Freud suffered from cancer of the mouth later in life. So bad was his pain that he had his doctor administer fatal levels of morphine to end his life. He was 83. After his cremation, his ashes were placed in an ancient Greek urn from around 300 BC, which was a gift from Princess Marie Bonaparte, great-grandniece of Napoleon. In 2014, thieves broke in and attempted to steal it, but the urn was broken in the attempt. Workers at the crematorium found the urn, along with Freud's ashes, shattered and scattered on the floor. The urn was retrieved and repaired, while Freud's ashes were carefully swept up and replaced. Because of this, Freud is now safely under glass. One final star who was cremated at Golders Green, but whose ashes were taken elsewhere for burial, is singer Amy Winehouse, resting here with her family at Edgwarebury Cemetery. In her short life, Amy would become one of the most unique vocalists of her generation, known for her deep contralto vocals. Her style was a combination of soul, blues, and jazz. Her album Back to Black led to 5 Grammy Awards in 2008. It would also become one of the best-selling albums in UK history, with hits like Rehab. It was her signature song, highlighting her public battle with drug and alcohol addiction. But the struggle that led to her greatest hit would also lead to her death. In 2011, Amy died from alcohol poisoning. Another musician lost at the age of 27. Rest in peace, Amy. And that concludes our tour. What are some of your favorite memories of the stars we visited today? Share them in the comments below, and be sure to like, share, and subscribe for more famous grave tours. Thanks for watching. We'll see you on the next one.